Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back nearly 4,000 years into the warm, dusty world of ancient Babylon. Imagine the sun hasn't even risen yet, and already the city murmurs to life. You shuffle along narrow, winding streets where the air smells of clay, dust, and something faintly yeasty, like bread just starting to rise. You pass low mud brick homes, small shrines, and the looming shadow of a ziggurat ahead, its steps climbing like a giant staircase into the pale, star-stitched sky. You're barefoot, your tunic itches a little, and you're absolutely not ready for this shift. You're a baker's assistant now. You probably won't survive this. Between the fire hazards, the temple deadlines, and the slight risk of being sacrificed for burning the gods' daily bread, it's a little more intense than your average 9 to 5. But there's also something oddly soothing about it. The rhythms, the smells, the sheer predictability of dough rising, like your life is one long, slow exhale in barley flour. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious who else is drifting off out there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move past the outer walls, greeted by the babble of two sleepy guards debating whether figs or dates go better with breakfast beer. Past a well, past the goat pen. Your feet slap softly against the packed dirt road as you pass the corner where the fishmonger usually shouts by mid-morning. For now, it's quiet. Almost kind. The bakery is tucked into a shared courtyard near the temple complex. You duck inside. The floor is already warm from last night's oven. Someone left a pile of date pits in the corner again. Classic Dumuzi. You'd complain, but he did pull double shifts during the New Year festival, and he still limps from that burn incident. The main oven, a domed mud brick tanner, is cold for now. Your job, as always, is to light it. But first, water. Then, sweep the ash. Then, flour. Everything moves slowly in Babylon. Not because people are lazy, but because time isn't what you think it is. No ticking hands, no glowing screens. Time is shadows on a wall, rising bubbles in dough, the color of a flame or the soft collapse of a loaf's crown. You gather barley flour from a clay bin, measuring not by weight, but by volume, 2 scoops from the shell ladle, level with your knuckles. You add a little water, a little sour starter saved from yesterday, and begin to knead. Your hands sink into the mixture with a satisfying squish, and you wonder, as always, how much longer this takes when you're tired. Because it feels like kneading lasts an hour. But what is an hour? There are water clocks somewhere in the city, of course. Fancy things for priest astronomers who need to know when Mars will rise next. But not for you. For you, time is tactile. You poke the dough and know, this much bounce means 10 minutes have passed. That smell. 15. When it sticks more to the board than your hands, it's ready to proof. Probably. The head baker, a stout man with arms like sun-baked tree trunks, shuffles in behind you. He grunts. That's as much praise as you'll get today. He starts setting out the molds, the shallow, palm-sized ones for temple offerings, and the deeper ones for the merchant orders. You work beside him, pressing each ball of dough into the forms with rhythmic familiarity. The forms are arranged by expected bake time, not size. Some loaves need to wait longer for the priest's chant to finish. See? Time isn't ours. Time is God's and gut instinct. A soft breeze slips in through the narrow window slats. Somewhere outside, someone is singing to their oxen. You glance up and see the pale edges of dawn brushing the horizon, streaking everything in honeyed pink. The shadows from the courtyard pillars stretch long and low. You file that away, shadow angle, about half past kneading. It's strange, isn't it? Living in a world with no wristwatches, yet everything runs on timing. You rise when the roosters start. You mix the dough until it size just right. You bake it until the steam escaping smells like toast and ash and something just slightly sweet. Historians still argue whether these bakers use standardized routines or if everything was pure instinct. One tablet suggests a timing chant, another just lists ingredients. No stopwatch, no alarm. Just hot coals and experience. You place the final round into the oven with a curved paddle, stepping back as the flames lick higher. The tanner's mouth glows orange now, casting weird shadows across the walls. You'd love to sit down, just for a minute. But there's barley beer to fetch, and some picky temple attendant wants his loaves, not too puffy this time. You try not to roll your eyes. The city begins to stir outside. A child shrieks joyfully. A goat protests its morning bath. And above it all, that golden tower, the ziggurat, stands serene, catching the first real light of day. You wipe your hands on your tunic and yawn. One loaf down. Dozens to go. You wipe your hands on your tunic and the warm, slightly damp smell of fresh bread fills the bakery. The morning light is soft but steady now, creeping higher as the time creeps on. You're beginning to fall into the rhythm of the day, your hands moving with practiced ease, but there's something about this morning that's slightly different. It feels like time has a new shape today. Something you can't quite put your finger on. You notice that the head baker is humming a tune under his breath. It's not the usual song. It's a slow, steady rhythm. He's kneading dough without the frantic push he usually has. Almost like he's listening for something. The gods maybe. Or the way the light catches on the grain. Or perhaps he's already marking off the hours in his head. For you, it's all about the dough. The way it feels beneath your hands. You've learned that when it comes to timing, you don't look at a clock. You don't even think about the sun in the sky. You focus on the bread. It speaks to you in its own language. Back when you first started working here, you had no idea what you were doing. The first time you were tasked with baking for the temple offering, you accidentally made the loaves too small. Too small. The head baker was not pleased, to say the least. But now, you can feel it in your bones when the dough is right, and you can sense the exact moment to slide a loaf into the oven. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians truly understood the concept of time the way we do today. Some argue they relied heavily on the stars to mark the hours, while others think that their lives were paced by natural rhythms like the seasons or even the phases of the moon. But for you, time is measured by the rise of the dough, the heat of the oven, and the delicate balance of yeast and barley. You've learned that time doesn't need a number to be real. The head baker stands at the far side of the room, his hands sweeping flour into a pile. You wonder if he's thinking about his own rhythm of the day. Maybe it's not so different from yours. The rhythm of baking, of repetition. The way a baker's life becomes a series of little tasks, each one building upon the last, until, like the bread itself, it rises to something bigger. Outside, the marketplace is waking up. You can hear the faint cries of merchants hawking their wares and the bleat of a goat who clearly didn't get the memo about the early morning wake-up call. Your thoughts drift as you work, following the flow of the city as it gradually swells into life. There's something oddly comforting about the consistency of it all. The bakery, the smell of yeast, the feel of flour in your hands. It's a reminder that time, whatever shape it takes, is something you can hold on to. Even if it's just for a moment, with a loaf of bread in your palm. You pause for a second, taking in the sight of the rising loaves, their golden edges beginning to catch the first direct rays of the sun. You wonder how much longer you'll be kneading dough in this exact way. How many more years you'll be waking before the birds, measuring time with the changing shadows and the way the sun touches the world. The head baker has already moved on to the next task, his eyes scanning the loaves like a hawk. He doesn't need to look at the sun to know when to bake them. He just knows. Like you. That's the thing about time in Babylon, nothing happens quickly. Not the rising of the dough, not the setting of the sun, and certainly not the way the day stretches out. Time moves like syrup here, slow, sticky, and always a little warmer than you'd expect. You begin to understand that this is how the city works, how its rhythms work. It's about knowing what to expect and when. It's a quiet kind of certainty. Historians are still puzzled by the fact that, despite all the incredible advances of Babylonian civilization, there are few surviving records of how they actually kept track of time in the daily sense. Sure, they had complex calendars and systems for tracking celestial events, but when it came to something as mundane as knowing when a loaf of bread was baked just right, the method remains a bit of a mystery. It could be that the Babylonians relied on small things, like the color of the flame in the oven or the particular way the dough shifted when it was ready to rise. Or maybe the key to it all was something more mystical, something tied to the rhythms of nature itself. Whatever the case, it seems that time, for the Babylonians, was measured not by numbers but by the feel of it. A little like baking. The marketplace outside the bakery is now in full swing. You hear the calls of the first customers, drawn in by the sweet smell of the bread wafting from the bakery door. They're already starting to argue over prices, arguing like they're running out of time. As you work, you smile a little at the thought. They have no idea. In the end, it doesn't matter. Bread doesn't hurry. Neither does time. It's all part of the rhythm. You know this because you feel it every day in the dough, in the fire, in the light that shifts from pale to golden as the morning wears on. The loaves are ready now. The timing couldn't be more perfect. Your hands move, pulling the trays from the oven, setting them aside to cool. A feeling of accomplishment washes over you. The bread, the timing, the day, it's all in harmony now. And you feel it in your bones. The bakery's oven still radiates warmth, and the scent of toasted grain lingers thick in the air like a soft cloud. You wipe your hands on your linen apron, careful not to smudge the few loaves still left to cool. There's something satisfying about seeing them all lined up like that, each one shaped by your own hands, each one quietly ticking off a moment in time. Outside, the noise is swelling. The streets of Babylon are never truly quiet, but they hum in pulses. There's a kind of rhythm to them too, footsteps on brick, ox carts creaking, the occasional squawk from a very annoyed duck. You hear a child cry out for a sweet cake, his mother bargaining just out of reach. These sounds aren't a distraction. They're part of the tempo. You've started noticing how the bakery itself almost breathes in time with the city. And like any good tempo, there's an order to it all. You glance toward the bench near the oven, there's a set of strange-looking dough balls sitting there. They don't look quite right for baking. They're oddly firm, and, frankly, a little too round. You don't remember shaping them. You walk over, poke one gently. Yep. That's not bread. This is one of the head baker's little experiments. He's been fiddling with dough clocks again. Yes, dough clocks. You chuckle to yourself. The man's convinced he can measure time based on how long it takes these dough balls to rise or collapse in different temperatures. He swears he's close to figuring it out, a universal dough standard, like some kind of flour-based sundial. And honestly, it's not the worst idea. Historians still argue whether Babylonian bakers used dough intentionally as a timekeeper or if this is just one of those delightful historical accidents. The kind that happens when necessity, skill, and a little desperation collide. What's clear, though, is that dough, with its sensitivity to temperature, humidity, and time, offered an intuitive sense of timing long before mechanical clocks were even a twinkle in the future's eye. You lean down, nose nearly level with one of the dough spheres. The smell is faint, yeasty, with a hint of the barley flour that gives it that familiar earthy scent. You remember once asking the head baker why he didn't just use a water clock like the scribes do. He waved you off with a puff of flour and a scoff. Water clocks are for people who sit down all day. Dough is for people who move. And there's truth in that. Water clocks are temperamental things, prone to clogs and overflows. They were better suited for palaces, not steamy, soot-stained bakeries where flour gets into absolutely everything. Including your ears, probably. You scratched the side of your head. Yep. Still there. Instead, the head baker relies on what he knows, the push and pull of dough, the heat of the room, and the color of the coals. He keeps time with instinct. With practice. With his nose. You remember the first time he tested you. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the sun feels like honey and the air refuses to move. He handed you a ball of dough and simply said, "Tell me when it's ready." That was it. No timer. No advice. Just dough. And somehow, you knew. You waited. Watched. Felt. And when you said, "Now," he nodded like he'd been waiting your whole life for you to get that moment right. Since then, dough clocks have become a kind of private joke between the two of you. Sometimes he leaves one on your bench with a note, "Tell me the hour." And you do. Not with numbers, but with words like, "nearly cool enough to rest," or, "warm enough to split." These aren't units of time anyone outside the bakery would understand. But they're yours. And in a city as vast and noisy as Babylon, that kind of language feels sacred. Still, not everyone respects the subtle art of baking time. A few weeks ago, one of the scribes from the temple came in, all puffed up in parchment, waving his stylus like a sword. He wanted loaves for a ritual, and he wanted them at a precise time, the third hour after the zenith. You tried to explain that the zenith moved depending on the season. He didn't care. He left with his bread, but he also left with your lingering frustration. Because for all their fancy systems and shadow-casting obelisks, the scribes didn't understand what you knew. Time wasn't just something you watched. It was something you shaped. Something you touched, molded, even smelled. The dough told the truth. The stars could lie. And speaking of stars, your thoughts drift to the ziggurat. It looms on the horizon like a mountain that forgot to finish growing. They say the priests there keep time by watching Venus rise. That they can predict eclipses. That they mark the heavens with more accuracy than a bird marks the morning. But here on the ground, in the dim red light of the bakery's hearth, you keep your own kind of astronomy. The head baker walks by again, sniffs one of the dough spheres, and mutters, "Too quick. It's too quick today." You nod. You felt it too. That's the thing about Babylon. Even in the middle of all its planning, all its precise lines of cuneiform and carefully aligned temples, life still has a softness to it. Like dough. It resists straight edges. It rises and falls at its own pace. And just when you start to forget that, something reminds you. You glance at the little dough ball again, now visibly more puffed than before. Its edges are rounding out. It's close. You reach for your scoring knife, not to bake it, but to mark the time. Like a note in your own secret calendar. Another tick in the strange, warm clockwork of your life. Outside, the sun climbs a little higher, its glow now tilting through the narrow window slits and painting long golden stripes across the bakery floor. Inside, the scent of toasting grain thickens, warm and nutty, laced with the faint tang of date syrup. You're shaping loaves now, round, flat, crescent, some pressed with patterned seals to mark which temple or family ordered them. It's a kind of edible alphabet. Every fold, every press has meaning. Some are stamped with tiny gods, others with geometric lines. A language of dough. The stamps themselves are kept in a wooden drawer, well worn, their handles dark from years of use. You pick one up, press it gently into the soft dough. The design is simple, a rosette, the symbol of Ishtar. She's a goddess of love and war, which seems like an odd combination until you've tried explaining a sourdough starter to someone during festival season. Historians still argue about the exact meanings of some of these bakery seals. Were they primarily religious? Practical? Did the gods truly inspect each loaf brought to their temple altars, or was the stamping more about bookkeeping than belief? As your hands work, the dough responds like muscle memory. Press, fold, rotate. You lose yourself in the repetition. Time slows again, not in a poetic sense, but literally. You feel it soften. Like honey warmed in the sun. You think about the barley itself. Babylonian barley isn't the fat, obedient grain of modern times. It's stubborn, husky, unpredictable. It grows in soil licked by the Euphrates, sometimes too salty, sometimes too dry. Harvests depend on lunar calendars and river moods. Some years, the grain cooperates. Some years, it sulks. Still, every day, the bakery opens. You remember how the scribes say that Nabu, the god of wisdom, once wrote the destiny of grain on a clay tablet. If true, you'd like to have a word with him. Perhaps suggest a rewrite. Maybe one with a bit more rain. The loaves are ready for the oven now, so you move to stoke the fire, feeding it with strips of dry palm frond and kindling. The flames kiss the edges of the coals, and the heat rises in waves that shimmer like summer hallucinations. You blink, and for a moment, you swear you see a temple dance in the firelight. Then it's gone. Baking in Babylon isn't a gentle affair. It's hot, unpredictable, and full of shifting variables. The clay ovens, shaped like upside-down jars, demand constant tending. Too hot, and your crust burns before the center cooks. Too cool, and the dough droops, sulking like a lazy cat. But somehow, you make it work. You've learned to read the oven, the way a farmer reads clouds or a scribe reads dreams. A hiss here, a crisping sound there, it's its own language. Another kind of timekeeper. And then there's the yeast. Oh, the yeast. Babylonians didn't exactly measure yeast with spoons. Starters were inherited, like family secrets or grudges. The mother culture sits in a bowl, bubbling faintly, alive in a way that's unsettling if you think too hard about it. Some claim their starter came from their grandfather's grandfather. Others swear theirs has seen the reign of 5 kings and 2 floods. Is that true? Probably not. But you wouldn't dare throw it away. You feed it barley mash and whisper the occasional compliment when no one's around. Just in case. It bubbles with approval today, and you feel smug. There's nothing worse than an angry starter. Ask the baker 2 stalls down. He once ignored his for 3 days during a festival and had to start over from scratch. His new one is moody. Probably holds a grudge. You scrape a bit of the bubbly starter into a new batch of dough, watching it snake its way through the grain. Tiny, invisible creatures hard at work. The smell is unmistakable, faintly sour, slightly sweet, like something just beginning to remember its own purpose. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians understood fermentation scientifically or simply as magic. There's evidence that temple bakers tracked rising times with lunar phases. One recipe even suggests leaving the dough overnight under Ishtar's eye, a poetic nod to the evening star. You like that? Imagine a loaf kissed by the goddess herself. You check on the first round of loaves in the oven. The crusts have begun to brown, splitting slightly along the edges. You give them a gentle tap. The sound is hollow and warm, a drumbeat that says, "I'm ready." As you pull them out, the smell hits like a soft pillow to the face. Golden crust, malted grain, roasted sesame. One of the temple guards will be by soon to collect them, so you line the loaves neatly on a woven tray. Offerings for gods and humans alike. You steal one for yourself. Just a heel. Just enough to keep the morning going. The crust crunches, the center still steaming. Time folds in on itself for a moment. You could be in any century, any city, any bakery. The taste is that ancient. And as you chew, you remember something funny. You never once looked at a sundial today. You didn't need to. The afternoon creeps in like molasses poured from a cool clay jug, slow, sticky, and practically invisible until it's already pooled around your ankles. The bakery's rhythm doesn't change much, but your muscles feel it. That heaviness behind the knees, the flour settling deeper into the creases of your skin. The air thickens just slightly, sweetened by date bread and the heat of coals that never truly go out. You pause to drink from the shared jug near the hearth, its rim smooth from hundreds of lips. The water is cool, pulled from a jar kept shaded in the courtyard. It tastes faintly of clay and summer. A few gulps, and your mind clears just enough to catch the murmuring of voices outside. They're gathered again, two old men arguing about something trivial under the fig tree that leans stubbornly into the street. You hear Gilgamesh tossed in once, followed by a derisive laugh. Probably debating whether he was real, again. Babylon loves a myth. But inside the bakery, you return to something real, the next dough batch. This one is for flatbread, the kind carried out to the fields in bundles wrapped with linen or palm leaves. Soldiers eat this. Builders. Scribal apprentices. Anyone who needs to fill their belly without much fuss. These are cooked fast, pressed flat and baked on a clay slab heated from beneath. There's no time for frills. No sesame, no sweet syrup. Just flour, water, salt, and heat. Simple. Honest. Boring, maybe, but necessary. And here's the funny thing, this bread, the plainest in your repertoire, may just be the most ancient. Archaeologists have found similar loaves hardened into fossils in Mesopotamian ruins. Charred bits of crust that somehow outlived entire dynasties. One team once uncovered an entire bakery site, brick ovens, clay mixing bowls, and tiny stamps shaped like animals. Historians still argue whether these ancient setups were private enterprises or temple-run kitchens. Some believe local families paid temple bakers in grain or labor. Others argue the bakeries were communal, a shared resource during times of famine or flood. The answer, as usual, is probably both. Your own bakery sits somewhere in between, a hybrid of homey warmth and temple precision. You serve gods and neighbors alike, and no one complains as long as the bread doesn't burn. You glance at the ceiling and catch the flicker of light bouncing off something metallic, a thin chain of tiny bronze discs swaying just slightly. It was hung there by your mentor, supposedly to catch the breeze and tell the hour. In truth, it jingles anytime someone walks past or opens the door too quickly. Not exactly a Swiss watch. Still, it reminds you, things are moving. The day is aging. You turn back to the bread, slapping another round onto the hot slab. It hisses in protest, then settles. The scent is different than the earlier loaves, more primal. Smoky, toasty, with an edge of something charred. It's the kind of smell that travels, worming its way into alleys and under market tents until a passing merchant sniffs the air and decides they're hungrier than they thought. You smile. You've seen it happen. Bread controls people more than kings do, sometimes. A boy wanders in, barefoot, cheeks streaked with what might be mud or might be roasted fig paste. He's one of the neighborhood runners, a message carrier for the scribes. You know him. His name's Pelatu, and he always lingers just a little too long when there's fresh bread out. You toss him a half loaf, and he catches it with both hands like it's a relic. Time, he asks between bites. You glance at the light on the wall, at the bronze disc still swaying lazily, at the rhythm of your own movements. Still early, you reply. It's enough. Time, in Babylon, isn't exact. It's collective. It's a consensus between your senses and your setting. The merchants pack up when the sun hits the sixth crack in the temple wall. The priests call for prayers when the shadow falls just past the serpent carving. The bakers, well, the bakers feel it in their bones. You step outside briefly to stretch, the warm stones underfoot rough and familiar. The sky is a soft bronze now, cloudless and wide. A few women walk past with baskets of onions and dried lentils. One waves. You wave back. Overhead, a clay horn sounds from the temple tower, a long, low call that vibrates through the air like a plucked string. It marks the midpoint of the sun's descent. Not a countdown. More like a song verse reminding you where you are in the day. Back inside, you prepare the last batch for the afternoon, a braided wheat loaf for an elderly man whose daughter is getting married. It's wrapped with palm fronds and sprinkled with crushed fennel seeds. Fancy. Ceremonial. You'll even tie a red thread around it before he arrives, just for luck. Historians still debate whether red thread was decorative or magical in these contexts. Some say it wards off spirits. Others believe it simply meant, don't eat this one until the ceremony. Either way, it works. You finish kneading, and your hands ache, the kind of ache you'll feel again when you lie down later on your woven mat and close your eyes. Not pain. Just a memory of effort. And all the while, you've never once checked the time. The scent of baked grain still clings to your hair, your sleeves, the back of your hands. It has become part of you now, the same way river dust clings to a fisherman or ink stains settle into a scribe's cuticles. You are a baker in Babylon, and the day rolls forward not on wheels or gears, but on the curve of your arm as it scoops, folds, presses, shapes. It's getting later now, light turns soft, shadows stretch like sleepy dogs across the floor. A warm breeze pushes through the doorway, fluttering the corner of a parchment someone pinned near the oven earlier. It's a list, probably from the temple kitchens. You squint at the symbols. 10 loaves for sacrifice, 6 for priests, 2 for a wedding offering, 1 shaped like a fish. Probably for Enki. He always gets the fish-shaped ones. You move methodically. You've hit that part of the day where the motions take over. Your thoughts can drift now, a little. This is the thinking hour. The dough doesn't mind. You think about how strange it is, how this job, this messy, flour-caked ritual, is one of the few that genuinely binds the entire city together. The scribes write, the merchants haggle, the priests chant, but everyone eats. And they all need someone like you to make that possible. Outside, you hear the clang of a chariot while catching on a paving stone, followed by a muttered curse. The streets are never quiet, not even at this hour, but their tone changes. Earlier, it's business. Now, it's domestic, people returning, kids shouting, vendors selling their last dried figs for a copper half-piece. You return to your dough, which is rising slowly in a wide basin lined with linen. It's warm to the touch. Alive. You poke it gently, and it sighs back at you. You don't measure the minutes it's rested. You measured its mood. That's the secret here, no sandglass, no sundial. Just knowing. Your fingers know before your brain does. Your eyes know by the color, your ears by the hiss, your nose by the bloom of scent that unfurls when things go just right. And here's the odd part, Babylonian bakers did have timekeeping tools. Sort of. There were water clocks, clever clay jars with a tiny hole at the bottom, calibrated to drip steadily until the last drop fell. Some versions had carved marks inside the vessel. You'd peek in, see how much had drained, and know that, say, 2 mina of time had passed. Mina being a weight unit first, later adapted for, well, anything, including minutes. Historians still argue whether these clocks were accurate enough for daily use or reserved for rituals. Some believe temple bakers may have used them to time leavening or baking during ceremonies. Others think the entire process remained intuitive, too many variables for exactitude. You've seen one of those clocks, once. It was in the home of a high priest, gleaming with lapis inlays. You watched the water drip and found it oddly disappointing. Slow. Predictable. Not like bread at all. Bread has moods. Water clocks don't. So instead, you rely on older cues. The way your elbow creaks when the light hits the east wall. The bird that always squawks 3 times from the palm tree out back. The way your stomach grumbles halfway through kneading the 3rd bowl. Time is felt, not read. You dust the top of the risen dough with crushed emmer flour, then begin shaping it into the round spirals requested by a wealthy merchant's wife. They're showy. Not practical. A little too sweet. But they look nice when arranged in a circle on a painted tray, and that matters when you're hosting a dinner for 7 in-laws and a minor astrologer. As you shape each loaf, your thoughts wander again, to a story your father once told. He said the earliest bakers learned their trade from the ants. That someone watched a colony gather seeds, grind them with their jaws, and leave the mush to sit in the sun. Later, it rose. They tasted it. And, lo, the first leavened dough. You've always thought that story smelled fishier than the tigress in late spring, but it has charm. Others claim it was the gods themselves who taught baking, bestowing the gift of heat and grain to humanity as a peace offering after some forgotten war. That seems more likely, especially considering how finicky ancient ovens can be. You need divine help to keep them even. You tap the side of the clay oven gently with your knuckles, listening for the echo. It sounds right, deep, resonant, not hollow. Ready. The spirals go in. You lean back, watching the fire glow like a sleepy eye half-lidded with ash. The loaves begin to rise almost immediately, the scent changing again, sweeter this time, thanks to the honey glaze you brushed on the tops. You sit for a moment, just sit. Elbows on knees, hands limp, eyes unfocused. You let the warmth of the oven creep into your bones. You let the sound of distant laughter settle into the cracks of the mud brick walls. You let yourself forget what hour it is. Because here, inside these walls, time doesn't tick. It expands. The loaves finish baking with the tiniest hiss, like a whispered secret escaping from beneath a pillow. You use a wooden paddle to pull them from the oven, carefully, reverently. Each one settles on the stone counter with a soft thump, their golden crusts catching the last light filtering through the doorway. You arrange them on a wide reed tray, careful not to let them touch. They're still soft, still murmuring to themselves as the steam curls upward and disappears into the warm, dry air. The merchant servant will be by soon, his sandals always squeak on the bricks outside. He never speaks unless spoken to, and he never looks you in the eye. You suspect he once wanted to be a musician or a healer but somehow ended up carrying bread for a living. Life has a way of rerouting us. You mop your brow with a cloth already stiff with flour. The scent of fennel and honey clings to your fingers, and you think, not for the first time, that you wouldn't mind being buried with that smell. In fact, it wouldn't be the first time someone was. Ancient graves near Sippar have been found containing loaves of bread, charred black, wrapped in woven fiber, nestled beside tiny bowls of oil or beer. Offerings for the afterlife, yes, but also, comfort. As if the dead, too, would need a midnight snack on their way to the underworld. Historians still argue whether these were symbolic offerings or if families truly believed their ancestors would wake up, take a bite, and walk into the next world with crumbs on their chin. Some say the bread was there to feed the gods during their brief visits among the tombs. Others suggest the real reason was far simpler, love. What else do you give the dead, except what you baked with your own hands? You glance at your hands now, cracked knuckles, a burn near the wrist, flour in every line. You flex your fingers and let them rest for a moment against the warm edge of the oven. Even your bones feel seasoned. Outside, voices grow louder. A neighbor's child recites a poem, probably practicing for school. Something about a king who turned into a fish. The rhythm is off, but the effort's there. You think of your own childhood, back when your arms were still too short to reach the oven ledge, and your father would let you shape tiny animal loaves that puffed up into doughy monsters. You remember laughing when one came out with a nose like a goat and ears like a pigeon. He said that was the best kind. Time passes differently when you're young. Long days. Short years. Now it's the opposite. You blink, and the season changes. Your kneading cloth fades from white to brown to something resembling mud. One morning, you realize the boy who swept the floor is now the man who bakes the morning loaves before you arrive. You hear the squeaky sandals outside. Right on time. The servant steps inside, nods, and waits as you wrap the loaves in linen and bind them with twine. You place a sprig of dried thyme on top, fancy, unnecessary, but pleasing. He doesn't thank you. He never does. But he lingers for half a breath longer than needed. That's something. When he leaves, the light has shifted again. The wall where the sun once painted gold is now painted shadow. Cool shadow. A reminder that the day is not infinite. That your own energy, like a loaf in the oven, has limits. You move slowly now, clearing the workspace with long, practiced gestures. You return tools to hooks, brush flour into the cracks between bricks, nudge the ashes into a corner for tomorrow's fire. And then you check the old rope hanging beside the oven. It's crude, a single strand of dyed linen tied with knots at intervals. Each knot corresponds to something, a prayer, a batch, a time of day. Your mentor once claimed he could tell the hour just by which knot had been turned toward the door by the breeze. You're not sure that's true, but you keep it anyway. A superstition, perhaps. Or a memory. Historians still puzzle over whether Babylonian timekeeping was more practical or poetic. On one hand, they had lunar calendars, complex astronomical tables, even eclipse predictions. On the other, they trusted shadows, sounds, smells, and knots in strings. Maybe both were true. Maybe all clocks begin as metaphors. You sit down for the first time in hours. Your back sighs. You peel a date and let its syrupy sweetness coat your tongue. You chew slowly, eyes half closed, listening to the street fade into low murmur. The city doesn't sleep, but it does soften. A cooling breeze floats in, rustling the basket of barley near the doorway. You pull your shawl tighter. Your shift is almost done, but the work is never truly over. Tomorrow, there will be new dough, new orders, new measurements made by feel and smell and that invisible thread you tug between each moment of the day. No one's asked you the time. But if they did, you'd answer like this: the oven's cooling, the sky's quiet, and the pigeons on the roof have stopped squabbling. And that, you think, is as close to a clock as you need. Later that night, the bakery rests like a sleeping animal, warm in its belly, quiet in its bones. You remain a little longer, lingering in the afterglow of the day's labor. The air smells faintly of ash and honey and something deeper, almost holy, maybe it's the ghost of yesterday's loaves, still hanging in the rafters. You run your hand along the wall where generations of bakers have leaned, knuckles dusty with flour, eyes half closed from long hours. Your palm brushes over grooves in the clay bricks, worn smooth by countless other palms before yours. It's a reminder that you're part of a lineage that stretches backward like a long, spiraling braid of dough. Somewhere far above, the stars begin to wake. You step outside into the courtyard behind the shop, where leftover barley husks crunch beneath your sandals. A stray dog lifts its head, then lowers it again, unimpressed. You tip your head back to take in the sky. Babylonian astronomers, your more glamorous cousins in the temple, mapped this sky with precision. They could name the movements of Jupiter, plot eclipses, even predict solstices. They divided the sky into degrees, just like the circle, and from them, we inherited hours, minutes, and seconds. A full circle was 360 degrees, convenient, elegant, and oddly delicious if you imagine it like a cake cut into neat slices. But here's the curious thing: while the stargazers above calculated celestial time, the bakers below measured human time, by the crackle of crusts, the bloom of yeast, the heat of an oven's breath. Historians still debate whether these two kinds of time, divine and domestic, ever truly aligned. Were the temple priests adjusting their rituals based on dough-rising rates? Or was it the other way around? Did the bakers glance at the stars before kneading the first batch? No one knows. No one wrote it down. Or if they did, it got baked into a crust and eaten by someone with crumbs in their beard and no regard for posterity. You walk over to the old stone bench in the corner and sit, stretching your legs. You think of a time when this whole city was newer, fresher. Before the great ziggurat had its third level. Before King Hammurabi etched his famous laws on a stone taller than a man. You wonder, idly, whether those laws included anything about bakery hours. You have read some old tablets, cracked ones, sun-baked, fragile as a dragonfly wing. One, in particular, mentioned the price of bread during a famine. It laid out, in agonizing detail, exactly how many measures of grain should yield how many loaves, and what to do if someone dared to shortchange their neighbors. The punishment? Return double, or risk your bakery being burned to the ground. A bit dramatic. But effective. You think of that law every time you catch the apprentice skimping on barley. Still, not all tablets were grim. Some were charming. There's one fragment, kept in the archives of the temple school, that contains what might be the oldest recorded pun about bread. It roughly translates to, "What is warm, round, and always rises when the priest walks in?" The answer's been lost to time, or maybe that was the answer. You chuckle softly to yourself. The dog opens one eye, curious. You toss it a burnt heel from your apron pocket. It accepts. The moon is brighter now, casting pale outlines along the walls and baskets. Shadows stretch long and slow. You close your eyes and listen, not to the city, but to the bakery itself. The oven stones ping softly as they cool. A single grain cart rumbles somewhere far off. The world has not stopped, but it's paused, just a breath between one beat and the next. You take that breath. And another. This, too, is a form of timekeeping. The inhale and exhale of a resting baker. The interval between the last loaf and the first one tomorrow. You rise again, your legs a little stiff. You make one final circuit of the space, checking the flour sacks, stirring the coals, unlatching the tiny vent in the roof. You whisper a short blessing, as your father did, touching the oven 3 times. Not superstition. Tradition. And maybe a little superstition. As you close the door behind you, the rope with the knot sways gently in the night breeze. The knot facing outward now is the 4th one. You remember what that means. Time for sleep. You wake before the city does. The sky outside is still bruised with the colors of night, but there's a pale thread of blue pulling at the horizon. In the distance, a rooster, an ambitious one, lets out a half-hearted crow, like even he's unsure it's time yet. But your body knows. Your body always knows. You stretch slowly, careful not to stir your aching joints too much at once. The air is cool, almost sweet, and you savor that first moment before your feet hit the floor. A baker's morning begins not with noise, but with quiet intention. Back in the bakery, the hearth is just as you left it. The ashes are warm, not hot. The coals will need coaxing, which you do with a practiced hand, piling dried palm fronds and the brittle scraps of yesterday's delivery notes into a gentle pyramid. The fire sputters awake, like a sleepy child nudged too early. You hum to it as it catches. Not a song, exactly, just a sound you picked up from your grandmother, who always claimed dough liked music. Whether or not that's true, it calms your mind as you prepare the next round of mixing. You grind barley, measure water by eye, and stir the first pre-dawn batch with a stick worn smooth as soapstone. As the dough thickens, you press your fingers into it, not to shape, but to test. Soft but not wet. Resisting, but yielding. Like a cat that trusts you just enough. That's when you notice, your apprentice is late. Again. Historians still debate whether apprentices in ancient Babylon were formally trained or just tolerated into usefulness. Some say there were contracts, literal tablets outlining work expectations and even punishments for lazy behavior. Others argue it was more of a learn by not burning down the bakery situation. Either way, your apprentice is currently failing both models. You sigh, wipe your hands on your robe, and take over his usual task, shaping the specialty loaves. These aren't your regular flatbreads or temple rolls. No, these are the fancy ones, braided, notched, sometimes filled with date paste or pressed with a seal that makes them look like tiny sunbursts. You only make them on market days or feast days, and today is both. Not just any feast day, either. It's the day of first wheat. A minor holiday for most. But for bakers? It's everything. The first harvest of the season means new flour, new experiments, and the official end of the winter stretch where you had to make the old barley last like a story told too many times. You fetch the fresh flour, just delivered last night, and run your fingers through it. Light. Cool. Soft as powdered silk. You lift a pinch to your lips and taste it dry. It holds a faint echo of the fields, like sunshine filtered through grain. This is going to be a good day. As you need, the rhythm takes over. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. Your shoulders loosen. Your breath deepens. You stop thinking about the missing apprentice or the broken paddle or the fact that the price of sesame has doubled again. For a few moments, it's just you and the dough and the steady pulse of time you create with your hands. There's something deeply grounding about it. You wonder if this is how the temple scribes feel when they press a stylus into wet clay, those tiny, patient wedge marks forming meaning where there was none. Or how the bronze casters feel as they pour fire into molds and wait to see if the shape holds. You're all shaping something. All translating time into texture. By the time the sun peeks over the rooftops, you've already loaded the oven. The fire is strong now, crackling with purpose. You sit back for a moment, sipping a weak beer from a clay cup, just enough to cut the dryness in your throat. You lean your head against the wall and let your mind wander. You think of the day of first wheat when you were a child, the parade of workers through the streets with baskets of fresh stalks. You remember laughing as the high priest blessed a loaf with such gravity you were sure it might float. You remember your mother pulling a special roll from the hearth, steaming hot and stuffed with chopped leeks, and declaring it the best she'd ever made, even if it split down the middle like a lazy donkey. You swore you'd make one better someday. Today might be that day. A small crowd begins to gather outside as the scent of baking bread curls out into the alley. Market-goers, temple attendants, sleepy nobles in perfumed robes. They don't knock. They know you'll come when it's ready. You glance at the shadow on the wall, creeping steadily down toward the floor. You don't need a sundial. You can feel the shift. Just like always, you're right on time. Later in the morning, with the loaves cooling on the reed mats and your apron streaked in ash and flour, you finally hear the soft slap of sandals in the corridor, your apprentice, arriving with the wide-eyed guilt of someone who knows he's too late for excuses but not quite late enough to avoid them. He opens his mouth. You raise a finger. He closes it again. In another setting, this would be dramatic. But here, in a bakery where even the oven seems to sigh in resignation, it's just routine. You gesture toward the sacks of flour and mutter something about barley weights and sweeping the ash pit. He nods, head low, and gets to work. Apprentices in Babylon, much like in every other civilization that dared to feed itself with fire and grain, weren't expected to be perfect. Just persistent. Maybe after another few years of sleeping through sunrise, this one might learn. As he moves about the bakery, quiet, now, your mind drifts again, this time to an odd bit of history you once overheard in the market. An old scholar, selling broken bits of cuneiform tablets to anyone who'd listen, claimed that some of the oldest timekeeping tools in the city weren't water clocks or sundials, but baking charts. You'd thought it was nonsense at the time. But now, not so much. Imagine this, long before anyone etched the movement of stars into tablets, someone noticed that if you put dough beside the hearth for exactly the time it takes to chant the hymn of Ishtar twice, it would rise just right. That if you placed a small loaf into the oven when the birds began their first morning calls, it would be ready by the time the city's second water delivery passed through the gate. These patterns, smelled, heard, felt, became your ancestors' clocks. Historians still argue whether early baking rituals were truly synchronized with official temple timekeeping. Some believe the temple adopted the baker's methods because they worked. Others insist that religious ceremonies dictated every aspect of civilian life, down to when you could butter your bread. You suspect the truth is somewhere in between. The temple liked its authority, but no priest wants burnt buns during a ritual. You run your hand along the edge of a flour bin, trailing lines like miniature canals. Your apprentice catches the motion, eyes flicking up nervously. You don't say anything. You don't need to. Instead, you point toward the sacks again. Today, you say, we try the six-fold twist. He blinks. It's a new pattern, you explain. Braided once, then turned, then braided again. You'll ruin it the first time. Maybe the second. But by the third, you'll begin to understand what dough wants. He nods, unsure whether this is punishment or poetry. It's both. As he fumbles with the wet mass on the table, you lean back against the wall, watching the light shift across the floor. This part of the day is always your favorite, post-baking, pre-distribution. The world outside is awake now, noisy and sun-drenched, but inside, the bakery is still wrapped in yesterday's warmth and this morning's silence. You remember an old joke a traveling merchant once told you: in Babylon, time moves faster when your bread burns. You didn't laugh at the time, it hit too close to home, but now you smile, just a little. You glance over to a small wooden board near the door, your tally slate. It tracks your daily totals: batches made, loaves sold, flour spent. But beside the usual numbers, you've also scratched little marks for less practical reasons. A star for every time the dough rose perfectly. A wave symbol for when a customer cried from nostalgia after one bite. A tiny swirl for every new shape you tried that didn't collapse like a wounded goat. These are your private records. Not meant for scribes. Not meant for the city's archivists or the temple's proud historians. But perhaps, someday, when a future baker finds this slate buried beneath layers of ash and dust, they'll smile and recognize the language. You sip another cup of beer, now flat and warm, and consider what else might serve as a clock. The way the oven's glow shifts from orange to white. The crust's faint crackle when it cools. The changing song of the morning birds as they hop closer, hoping for crumbs. The apprentice calls out to you, something about the twist collapsing. You saunter over, take the dough in your hands, and begin to reshape it with your thumbs. Feel it, you say. Don't force it. He nods. Outside, the street is growing louder. The festival crowd is beginning to buzz, drawn by the scent that now weaves through the air like invisible thread, rich, weedy, and touched with honey and heat. Soon, they'll come knocking. Some will be neighbors. Some will be temple servants. A few will be wide-eyed children clutching coins with sticky fingers. And they'll ask for bread, but really, they're asking for time. For memory. For one warm mouthful that connects them to every hungry morning and every full table their ancestors ever knew. You'll give it to them. Just as your grandmother gave it to you. By midday, the bakery has transformed from a hushed sanctuary of flour and fire to something closer to a marketplace shrine, bustling, warm, and filled with people murmuring praises not to the gods, but to your bread. You lean against the cool stone of the doorframe, arms folded, watching as your apprentice sweats and stumbles through the simple act of packaging loaves into reed baskets. He knots the twine wrong. Twice. You let it go. After all, this is the day of first wheat. The air itself seems blessed. A temple courier appears at the edge of the crowd, panting and solemn, bearing a sealed wax tablet. He nods at you, bows, too deeply, you think, and holds out the order. Special request for the house of Enlil, he mutters, as if saying the name too loudly might summon thunder. You take the tablet, break the seal, and read. It's a list of absurdly detailed specifications: 3 braided loaves in the shape of river reeds, for large rounds with sesame and stamped with the temple's crescent mark, and, most curious of all, a flatbread with the likeness of a lion. You raise an eyebrow. Your apprentice chokes slightly on his beer. Historians still argue whether these temple-shaped breads were meant for actual consumption or purely for display in rituals. Some texts suggest they were eaten at the climax of the ceremony. Others claim the loaves were left to rot as offerings, which, if true, makes the demand for perfect crusts all the more ironic. Either way, you've been chosen. Again. Your fingers twitch with the beginnings of design. You've done the reed loaves before, carefully folded layers cut into strips and pinched to mimic the long, swaying plants of the Euphrates banks. Easy enough. But the lion? That's new. You glance around. No model to work from. Just your memory of the grand lion statues outside the city gate, majestic, snarling, and absolutely not bread-shaped. But you'll figure it out. You always do. Back in the corner, you start with a wide base of dense barley dough, sturdier than wheat, holds shape better. You sculpt the paws first. 4 thick rounds, smoothed and curled like tiny cushions. Then comes the torso, one long loaf, dimpled to suggest the rise of the spine. The mane gives you trouble. You try scoring the crust with a carved ivory comb. Doesn't hold. You try twisting strips of dough and pressing them into the crown like sun rays. Closer. Finally, you pinch dozens of tiny ridges into the top with your fingernail, working in a spiral from the crown outward. It looks odd. But lion-esque. Sort of. You stand back, brush flour from your sleeves, and wait for it to rise. As you do, you hear an old street performer in the distance singing about Nin Sun, the wild cow goddess, and her son Gilgamesh. The words drift lazily on the breeze, carried by the heat and the hum of the city. You hum along without thinking. It's funny. You've baked for festivals, funerals, weddings, even for minor royal banquets. But it's these strange temple requests that always feel the most intimate, like you're sneaking into sacred space with nothing but dough and determination. There's a whisper that temple loaves were once used to measure time in rituals. Not just symbolic time, but literal time, each chant, each gesture matched to a loaf's stages, rising, baking, cooling. The bread and the ceremony unfolding in tandem, side by side. If that's true, you're not just a baker today. You're a timekeeper. The lion goes into the oven. You pray it doesn't deflate. While it bakes, you return to your ledger. It's more memory aid than a count book, scratched symbols and shorthand notations only you can decipher. 1 mark per batch. A triangle for failures. A crescent for temple orders. Today's page is cluttered. In a good way. You pause, adding a small pawprint symbol at the edge of the margin. Why not? Then, just as you're finishing up, the door opens again. A woman steps in, middle-aged, eyes sharp, voice wrapped in silk. You recognize her immediately. She's the wife of one of the lesser scribes, but carries herself like a queen. She doesn't wait for a greeting. I need bread, she says. You gesture toward the baskets. Plenty, honored one. No, she says, shaking her head. I need that bread. She points to the lion. Still baking. Still untested. Still dangerously experimental. You open your mouth to explain, then close it. Instead, you offer a polite smile and say, it's not for sale. It's for Enlil. She raises an eyebrow. Even Enlil shares. Touché. You chuckle softly, and for a brief moment, the tension lifts. In the end, you promise to make her one next week, smaller, gentler. A cub, maybe. She accepts this, and with a few loaves of honey-crusted barley rounds in her basket, she departs. When you finally pull the lion from the oven, it is, miraculously, beautiful. Golden brown. Firm. Eyes scored with just enough menace to pass as noble. You set it on a reed mat to cool, then glance once more at the slant of sunlight through the bakery slats. The hour is late. But it's a good late. A full day. Your apprentice finally knots the twine correctly. You say nothing. Just hand him the lion. Let him deliver it. Let him carry time. You've barely had time to wipe the flour from your hands before another visitor appears in the doorway. This one doesn't enter, just leans in like a breeze wearing a tunic. "Baker," he says, "they want you at the quay." You squint. "The quay?" He nods. "Guild business. Something about weights. Bring your standard loaf." "Ah, of course. The old barley weight standard." You groan softly, not because you mind the task, but because it means leaving your warm, yeasty temple behind and trudging through Babylon's sunstruck lanes with a lump of bread and a very specific kind of authority. You wrap the standardized loaf, a squat, palm-sized brick of barley bread weighed and sealed according to guild regulations, and tuck it into your satchel alongside a stone balance scale. The street outside pulses with life. Street vendors yell over boiled lentils and dried fish. Children dart between reed carts. A goat brushes your leg like it's been following you for blocks. You pick up your pace. By the time you reach the quay, the issue becomes clear. A merchant barge from Dilmun, distant, salt-washed, and full of pride, has brought grain for trade. But their weights don't match Babylonian measures. You watch two dockworkers argue over a sack of spelt like it's a diplomatic incident. The city clerk spots you and breathes a visible sigh of relief. Finally. You set the bread on the wooden measuring table, balance it against a stone weight, and begin the slow, deliberate process of recalibrating the foreign merchant's claims. The bread doesn't lie. It's baked to the exact standard set by the temple and enforced by the guild, a legal loaf, in essence. Historians still argue whether bakers in Mesopotamia truly held regulatory power, or whether their role was more symbolic. Clay tablets mention them as guardians of weights, but some suspect this was more ceremonial than practical. Still, you've shown up. You're holding the loaf. People are listening. That's power enough. The merchant grumbles, but accepts the recalculated value. A compromise is struck. Grain exchanges hands, and peace returns to the port. You slip the loaf back into your satchel and head home, your sandals tapping softly over sun-baked clay. On the way, you pass a small shrine to Nisaba, the goddess of writing and accounting. Her statue is weather-worn, her stylus chipped, but someone has left a flat cake at her feet. A gift from another scribe, perhaps. You nod respectfully. It's strange to think how much of Babylon runs on things you can eat. Bread as payment. Bread as evidence. Bread as law. All of it bound together by heat and hands. Back at the bakery, your apprentice is attempting to stack loaves in a decorative tower. You let him. Everyone deserves a folly now and then. Inside, a neighbor is waiting, a young mother with a baby on her hip and exhaustion in her bones. She offers a small jar of date syrup and a hopeful smile. Anything sweet left? You glance at the racks. Only one honey bun remains, a small thing, almost too stale. You wrap it anyway, drizzle it with a few fresh drops from her own jar, and hand it over. She whispers thanks and disappears into the dusk. This, too, is timekeeping. Not in hours or chance, but in rhythms of need and kindness. The way some days ask for generosity. The way others demand rules and exact weights. The way both are true. Later that evening, as the sky deepens into a velvet bruise, you sit by the fire pit with your feet up, chewing on a cooled crust and watching the embers twitch. You think about how the first bakers, your ancient ancestors, figured all this out. Fire, flour, water, and time. That's it. And yet from that humble magic came empires and ceremonies and temple lions. You close your eyes and imagine the earliest loaves, burnt, probably. Flat. Uneven. But full of hope. A neighbor's dog barks once, then falls silent. The stars begin to flicker into place, one by one, like crumbs shaken from a divine tablecloth. Your apprentice wanders over and hands you a rough piece of clay. I tried to make a lion too, he says. It looks more like a tired sheep, but you smile. Excellent, you say. Fierce. Do you think bread will still be around in 1,000 years, he asks. You shrug. Depends who's hungry. Maybe they'll still use it to settle arguments, he says. You laugh. Only the civilized ones. He grins, then heads back inside, the small sculpture cradled like treasure. You lean back against the stone wall, cradle your hands behind your head, and let the warmth of the fire and the faint scent of barley cradle you like an old story told over and over until it becomes the shape of the day itself. The next morning brings more bread and more questions, but today it's different. Today, you feel an odd sort of stillness, almost as if the city itself is waiting for something. The early sunlight is soft and almost apologetic, as if it, too, is easing into the day with care. You open the door of the bakery, and the familiar scent of rising dough fills the cool air, mixing with the last traces of the evening smoke from the fire pit. You can hear the clatter of pottery in the distance as a potter spins his wheel, a sound so familiar it feels like part of your own rhythm. Your apprentice is already at the oven, wiping flour from his brow, while a line of customers gathers outside, business as usual, though their chatter is muted, almost reverent. There's an air of expectation, and it's unsettling in its quietness. You've had mornings like this before. When everything seems perfectly aligned, when the flour feels a little softer and the yeast a little more eager to rise. You've learned not to question these days. Instead, you get to work. But before you can move, a familiar voice calls out from the doorway. Baker. A moment, if you please. It's the temple clerk, always urgent, always speaking like every request is a matter of divine importance. You've seen him before, with his robes still immaculate despite the midday heat, his face a permanent mask of concern. Have you finished the order for Enlil's festival? He asks, without preamble. We need those loaves immediately. You nod, reaching for the 2 baskets wrapped in reed mats, each containing loaves shaped like the sun and moon, bright and solemn in their form. We're ahead of schedule, as always, you reply, offering the loaves with a gesture. Though, I must ask, why the hurry? He hesitates, his eyes flickering. The gods are watching. You don't ask for clarification. Not because you're afraid, but because you understand. The gods, whether made of clay or stone, have their whims. The people? Well, they're at their mercy. He takes the loaves with a careful bow and turns on his heel, disappearing back into the bustling street. You return to your counter, but your mind is already moving ahead. What's next? You think of your list, breads for families, for festivals, for rituals, but then your thoughts go elsewhere. You think about that quiet moment last night, when you were alone with the fire. The way the embers had glowed, like forgotten secrets waiting to be remembered. And then, without warning, an idea flickers into your mind. It's not one you've considered before, not really. But now, as the idea settles, you realize it might be time. You need to create something new, something beyond the familiar loaves and the endless orders. You walk to the corner of the room, where your unused clay is stacked. There, on the top, you spot a small block of it, slightly cracked but usable. You pick it up, roll it between your hands, and begin to mold it. At first, it's an abstract shape, a swirl, a wave, nothing recognizable. But as your fingers work, it begins to take form. A loaf. But not just any loaf. This one will be a symbol. Not of the gods or the festival, but of something much older. Something deeper. In the distance, the merchant from Dilmun appears again, laden with sacks of grain, and you pause for a moment, watching him walk past your window. He gives you a brief nod. It's a strange sort of connection, you realize, between you and him. Both of you making deals with time. And in that moment, the new loaf is born. You take a step back and study it, then smile softly to yourself. It's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. You set it aside to rise. And while it does, you return to your own rhythm. The rhythm of kneading, of waiting, of creating something from nothing, just as you always have. Historians still argue whether bakers in ancient Mesopotamia were as interested in symbolism as they were in function. Some suggest that the loaves were simple, utilitarian objects, while others point to the artistry and ceremonial aspects woven through every bite. Whatever the truth, you're not worried. You've always believed the two can coexist, practicality and beauty, form and function. When the sun is high and the bakery is quiet, you glance at the loaf again. It's now risen, just enough. You slice it open with a sharp knife, revealing its rich, golden interior, just slightly overbaked, but perfect nonetheless. The crust is thin, almost delicate. Not unlike the crusts of old, in those first uncertain moments of baking when everything was trial and error. You don't know what the future will bring. Will you continue to bake lions and ceremonial breads? Will you eventually craft new kinds of loaves for new times, or will you simply fade into history as just another face behind the oven? For now, it doesn't matter. You're content to simply knead the dough and wait for the world to come to you, one loaf at a time. And as the last of the morning's visitors trickle out, you take a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the oven on your face. It's a good day. And soon, it'll be time to sleep. The sun is beginning its slow descent when you return to the bakery in the late afternoon, feeling the warmth of the day lingering in the cool stone beneath your feet. You've spent the morning crafting a new kind of loaf, but it's now time to settle back into the rhythm of the familiar. Your apprentice is already here, moving like a well-practiced machine. He's kneading dough with an ease that you once envied. Over the years, you've taught him the basics, but in truth, he's surpassed you in some ways. He's more precise with measurements, faster with the kneading, and almost always right on time. And yet, you still catch him watching you every now and then, waiting for some new bit of wisdom or guidance. But today, you're not teaching. You're simply existing in the space between flour and fire, between the first breath of morning and the slow pull of the evening's cool breeze. A neighbor enters with a basket, the familiar clink of pottery announcing her presence before she speaks. Good evening, baker. Got anything fresh today? You smile as you gesture to the rack behind you. Nothing more than usual. A few loaves for your supper, perhaps. Her smile flickers in response, but she shakes her head. Actually, I've been wondering, have you ever tried baking without yeast? You raise an eyebrow, intrigued. Without yeast? And what would that be called? She pauses, thinking. I don't know. But my grandmother always said bread could be made with just water and flour, no rising, no waiting. I think they used it in times of famine. You pause for a moment. This is a bit of ancient knowledge, something from the depths of necessity. The kind of recipe passed down through generations, crafted from scarcity and ingenuity. There's something beautiful about that, baking in desperation, turning water into something edible. Maybe one day I'll try it, you reply, tapping the countertop thoughtfully. But today's not that day. We have enough bread as it is, don't we? The neighbor nods, collecting a few loaves with a contented sigh, though you sense she's still mulling over the idea of yeastless bread. Once she's gone, the silence settles back in, and you find yourself pondering the notion. Could it be done? In times of scarcity, the simplest ingredients had to be turned into sustenance. In that way, baking had always been about so much more than the product. It was about resilience. Creativity. You glance over at your apprentice, who is now stacking the loaves with a care that seems almost reverent. It occurs to you that baking has become so much more than a job for both of you. It's a form of expression, a way to shape time into something tangible, something edible. Historians still argue whether early bakers ever fully understood the scientific principles of fermentation or whether their practices were purely instinctual. Some believe bakers stumbled onto yeast's power by accident, perhaps through a forgotten grain left in the heat. Others claim the practice was passed down from even earlier civilizations, carried on like a sacred tradition. Either way, there's something magical about yeast, the way it transforms an ordinary mix of flour and water into something alive. You've always felt a quiet reverence for that transformation, something almost spiritual. Your apprentice calls out, pulling you from your thoughts. "Baker, how do we know when the bread's perfect?" You smile, a slow grin spreading across your face. You know it's perfect when it feels like it's waiting for you to pull it from the oven. When it has that golden brown crust, and you can hear it whispering to you. Every loaf has its moment. The apprentice nods, already testing a loaf with his hand, pressing gently to check its readiness. It's moments like this that remind you of the very first days when you were a young apprentice, eager and unsure. Back then, the heat of the oven felt like a challenge, a test to be conquered. But now, you've learned to work with the heat. To respect it. The evening stretches on in its quiet, gentle rhythm. Your apprentice has settled into his work, the kitchen filled with the steady sound of bread being made, kneading, shaping, and the occasional clink of pottery. You finish the last loaf, place it on the cooling rack, and step back. For a moment, you close your eyes and listen to the soft crackle of the fire, the whispers of the oven cooling down. It feels almost meditative. Bread is not just a product, it's a part of your existence, as much as the very air you breathe. The day's work is done. You sit down in the corner of the room and let your body settle into the familiar chair. The sun has dipped below the horizon, and in its wake, the night is filling the room with a soft, cool presence. The shadows lengthen, but inside, the warmth of the bread and the lingering heat from the oven embrace you like a quiet, reassuring hug. A few moments pass, and then you stand, stretching with a contented sigh. It's time to lock up for the night, to close the door and let the city fall into its own rhythms. But before you do, you take one last look at the oven, the bread, the quiet work that has shaped your life. The bread waits, but so does the world beyond. You lock the door behind you and step into the cool air, knowing that tomorrow you'll be back here, kneading the dough once more. And maybe, just maybe, you'll try that yeast-less bread. Because, in the end, it's all about what the world asks of you. Whether it's yeast, flour, or the quiet pull of time. The bread will always rise. The next morning is, like many others, quiet in its own peculiar way. The soft hum of the city just waking up, the distant clatter of carts rolling down the cobbled streets, the calls of vendors settling into their usual positions. It's all so familiar, so expected, that it feels almost like a second heartbeat. And yet, as you step into the bakery, something feels different today. The air is cool, but the smell of fresh bread lingers, thick and warm. Your apprentice is already working at the counter, his hands moving with the ease of routine, shaping dough into neat, symmetrical loaves. But you notice something, today, he's working slower than usual, as if savoring the moment. He glances up at you, catching your gaze, and gives you a small, knowing smile. "Another day, another loaf?" you ask, leaning against the counter. He nods. "Another day." And as you watch him work, you feel a strange sense of peace. There's no rush today, no pressing orders, no unrelenting rhythm of time bearing down. The bread will be baked, the loaves will rise, and the sun will move across the sky just as it always has. It's strange to think that, for all the bustling of the world outside, it's this little corner of it that holds your attention. A space where you create, where you mold time itself with flour, water, and heat. As you glance around the room, your thoughts wander again to the symbolism of bread, how it has been more than just sustenance for so long. The stories woven into its crust, the sacrifices made in the name of sustenance. And then you recall the loaf you made last night, the one that had no yeast. It wasn't the best bread you've ever baked, but it had something that others didn't. Something older. Something rooted in necessity, in the stories of those who came before. You wonder what future bakers will make of the loaves you've created. Will they speak of the fine details of your recipes? Or will they simply remember the bread, the way it was shaped, the way it was offered? Historians still argue whether bread-making was the backbone of ancient civilizations or merely a backdrop to more grandiose affairs. Some insist it was the unspoken foundation of society, nourishing both body and spirit. Others argue that it was only one part of the puzzle, overshadowed by other discoveries. But for you, today, it doesn't matter. You're content to continue, quietly shaping history with each loaf you bake. Your apprentice finishes his batch, the last loaves rising in the corner. He looks at you, his face unreadable for a moment, before he speaks. Do you think we'll ever truly run out of ways to bake bread? He asks. Do you think there's an end to it? You pause, considering the question. It's a simple one, but it's layered with meaning. For in that moment, you realize that baking is not just about technique, it's about memory. It's about continuation. No matter how many loaves you bake, no matter how many variations you try, there's always something more. Something older, deeper. The need to create, to nourish, to tell stories in ways words can't. I don't think we'll ever run out, you finally reply. The world may change, but there will always be bread. And as the morning settles into noon, and the bakery fills with the sounds of dough being kneaded and loaves being pulled from the oven, you can't help but feel a deep, calming sense of satisfaction. The world may be moving at its usual, unpredictable pace, but here, in this space, in this moment, it's enough. The bread is warm, the customers are content, and the cycles of time continue. You close your eyes for just a moment, letting the rhythm of the bakery wash over you, the steady rise and fall of the bread, the hum of life outside. The past and the present blending together, as seamless as the loaves you've shaped. You are part of something ancient, something enduring. And in that quiet thought, there's peace. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together.